David!
Leela.
I was driving along the Blue Ridge Parkway late that afternoon, the kind of late summer day where the light hangs just long enough to make the world feel suspended. The sun was slipping behind the peaks, painting the valley in long, crooked shadows that stretched across the road. I had been driving for hours, winding through familiar curves and blind bends, the engine's hum the only steady companion. Something about the day made me restless, so I slowed my truck as I approached a particularly narrow stretch where the asphalt cracked and the white lines had long faded. The road curved sharply ahead, and the trees leaned in closer than usual, their gnarled limbs stretching over the road like they were listening to every sound I made. I decided to pull over to take a few photos, the kind of shots that caught the last light bleeding across the mountains. I killed the engine, and for a moment the silence was complete. Just me, the fading sun, and the distant murmur of the wind through the pines. As I stepped out of the truck, the air felt cooler, a sudden dip that made the fine hairs on my arms stand on end. I raised my camera and crouched near the edge of the road, lining up the shot. That's when I heard it, a whisper, soft, just a breath against the silence. My name. Just my name, carried on the wind, almost teasing. I froze, lowering the camera, scanning the shadowed forest that pressed against the roadside. Nothing moved except the tree limbs swaying gently. My heart picked up, the sound of my pulse loud in my ears. At first, I thought it was a trick of the wind, some echo in the hollows of the trees. But the whisper came again, closer this time, more deliberate, a single syllable that sent ice down my spine. I stepped back toward the truck, my boots crunching on the gravel, but even that small noise didn't seem enough to wake the silence. My breath fogged in front of me, the chill heavier than it should have been for a late summer evening. The shadows among the trees seemed to stretch, shifting in ways that made my stomach tighten. Shapes flickered between the trunks, just glimpses, gone the moment I looked straight at them. I shook my head, telling myself it was tricks of the light, but my instinct screamed otherwise. There was something there, watching, waiting, and it didn't want me taking pictures. I climbed back into the truck, locking the doors, but the whispers didn't stop. Now they circled the cab, soft but insistent, brushing against the windows like fingertips. My knuckles whitened on the steering wheel, and I could barely force the engine to turn over. As I started down the road, the voices fell silent, leaving only the steady crunch of my tires on the gravel and the occasional rustle of wind through the pines. I tried to laugh it off, telling myself it was my imagination, the kind of half-laugh that shakes and dies in your throat. The road twisted on, and the forest pressed closer, the mountains darkening as night settled in. Every shadow seemed alive, moving in the periphery of my vision. I found myself glancing in the mirrors constantly, expecting to see someone, or something, following. And for a moment, just for a heartbeat, I thought I saw a figure standing where the road bent, impossible in proportion, fading into the dusk. I blinked and it was gone. My pulse hammered in my ears, loud enough that I thought the truck's engine might drown in it. I tried to rationalize it. The parkway is known for its wildlife, I told myself, for uneven roads and strange echoes. Maybe I'd seen a deer, maybe a shadow flung by the setting sun. But even as the thoughts circled in my head, I could feel the weight of those whispers lingering, like a pressure in the back of my skull. Every bend in the road, every cluster of trees, seemed to hold its breath. It was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your own skin feel loud and raw. I pulled over once more at a scenic turnout, forcing myself to breathe and calm my nerves. The valley stretched below, the last threads of sunlight washing over the ridges, and for a brief moment I felt normal. But then it came again, a whisper, so soft I could barely hear it, calling my name. Closer this time. It didn't come from the forest, not really, but from everywhere at once, pressing against the truck as though it had learned my rhythm, knew where to find me. I hit the accelerator, tires spinning over gravel, and didn't slow until I reached the edge of the next town. The streetlights felt harsh and unnatural after the soft, dark woods, but at least they felt human. Even now, days later, I can't shake that evening. Every time I drive past a stand of pines, I imagine them leaning closer, whispering. I wake at night thinking I hear my name on the wind. And the parkway itself, twisting, endless, beautiful, remains just a little too silent in my memory, like it holds its breath, waiting for the next traveler foolish enough to stop and listen. Something followed me that night, I'm certain of it. Not in the way a wild animal stalks, but in a quiet, deliberate way, a presence that doesn't need eyes to see me. I've never returned to that bend, that stretch of asphalt, and I don't think I ever will. And even when I tell the story, the unease creeps in again, like the whisper that still calls me from the shadows of the Blue Ridge, waiting for a night I might wander too far again. I can remember the smallest details, the smell of pine resin in the cooling air, the subtle crunch of gravel under my boots, the exact way the shadows stretched across the road. They all come back with vivid clarity, sharper than memory should allow. Every night, I replay the moment I first heard it, the whisper sliding under my skin like a cold finger. And I can't convince myself it was just imagination. The road was empty, the sky fading, and yet something existed there that didn't want to be seen but demanded to be heard. Even now, when I drive other roads in the mountains, I'm careful to avoid the bends where shadows seem too long and the pines too close. I warn friends about the parkway, about the bends where the asphalt narrows and the wind carries voices. Most laugh it off. They don't remember what it's like to feel the forest press in, to hear something softly call your name from the darkness. But I remember. Every curve, every shadow, every fleeting flicker between the trees. It's a memory that refuses to fade, a moment trapped in the low light of dusk, whispering and patient, waiting for me to return. I'll never know what it was, and part of me hopes I never do, because knowing would mean it could find me again. And I've learned, sometimes the safest thing in the mountains is to listen, and never stop moving. The Blue Ridge Parkway is beautiful, yes, and peaceful, yes, but it holds secrets in its folds, shadows that linger long after the sun has gone. I learned that evening that curiosity is dangerous there, and that the quiet is never just quiet. Sometimes it's listening, and sometimes it calls back. This is a story that will stay with me forever, like a faint echo I can't shake, whispering my name when I least expect it. I can never forget the weight of that dusk, the cold breath of the air, and the way the shadows moved when I wasn't looking. I didn't just drive that road, I survived it, and every time I close my eyes, I hear the whisper again, soft and patient, just beyond the trees. I had been hearing about the cabin on Hogback Ridge for years, stories whispered among locals in the small towns nestled in the valleys below. They called it abandoned, haunted, cursed even, though nobody really knew why. People spoke of laughter echoing through the trees at night, of crying that would vanish if you tried to follow it, of footsteps pacing along the ridge when no one should have been there. I didn't believe in ghosts or curses, but curiosity gnawed at me, an itch I couldn't ignore. One late afternoon, when the sun was dipping toward the western peaks and the forest cast long, jagged shadows, I decided to see the cabin for myself. The trail up the ridge was overgrown, thorny brush scraping against my arms, roots twisting beneath my boots, threatening to trip me with every step. The deeper I went, the quieter it became, until even the birds seemed to have vanished. It was a heavy, unnatural silence, the kind that presses against your ears and makes your own heartbeat feel too loud. I kept going, drawn by some stubborn compulsion to see the place that had haunted so many stories. Eventually, the cabin appeared, crouched on the slope like a tired old sentinel. Its wood was gray and cracked, shutters hanging crookedly, the roof sagging. Even from a distance, it had a presence that pressed against you, something patient and waiting. I reached the porch and hesitated, the stories and warnings buzzing in my head. Finally, I pushed the door. It creaked, reluctantly, on rusty hinges. The smell hit me immediately. Musty, dry rot, the faint but unmistakable scent of something long decayed. Sunlight filtered through the broken shutters in streaks, illuminating the dust that hung in the air like tiny motes of gold. I stepped inside, the floorboards groaning under my weight, echoing through the hollow interior. For a moment, the cabin was silent except for the sound of my breathing. Then a sudden gust slammed the door behind me, cutting off the world outside, plunging me into a quiet so thick it felt tangible. That's when I heard it, a chair scraping across the floor. Slow, deliberate. I froze, heart hammering, eyes scanning the empty room. There was nothing. The cabin was empty. And yet, every instinct screamed at me that I was not alone. I moved cautiously toward the door, trying to turn the handle. It wouldn't budge. Panic pressed at the edges of my mind. I pulled again, harder, but it was as if the cabin itself had decided to trap me within its decaying walls. Shadows seemed to stretch in the corners, thickening, pressing closer with every heartbeat. The air felt heavier, almost viscous, each breath a labor. I forced myself to move, exploring the cabin in search of a window or some other escape. Every step echoed like a gunshot, bouncing off the walls and into the empty rafters. The room felt alive in a way that made my skin crawl, the way shadows pooled in corners, stretched across the floor, and seemed to follow me as I moved. The farther I went, the more I could feel them pressing in, just at the edges of my vision. I told myself it was nothing, an overactive imagination fueled by the stories I had heard, but the instinct in my chest screamed otherwise. Something was here. Something patient and unseen, watching me. I crouched near what remained of a fireplace, the bricks blackened with soot that had long lost its purpose. My hands shook as I tried to steady my breathing. That's when I heard it again. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, pacing somewhere above me. I couldn't see the ceiling without straining my neck, and when I did, there was nothing but the sagging timbers. The cabin was empty, and yet the sounds continued, circling, tracing me as I moved. I could feel the air shift, a faint draft that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I wanted to scream, but my voice caught in my throat, swallowed by the oppressive quiet. Hours, or maybe minutes, time seemed to stretch and bend. The longer I stayed, the more the cabin seemed to close in. Shadows pooled under the windowsills, thick and dark, and I felt a strange heat behind my eyes, as if I were being watched, studied. The stories of laughter and crying, of footsteps pacing through the forest, were no longer just tales. They were real, tangible. I could feel them in the way the air trembled with unspoken intention, in the way the floorboards groaned even when I didn't step near them. Desperation clawed at me, and I tried the door again. This time it moved inch by agonizing inch, though the hinges protested loudly, screaming into the hollow room. I shoved, pushing with all the strength I had, until finally it opened just enough for me to slip through. I didn't stop to look back, didn't even glance at the cabin's hollow silhouette against the fading sunlight. The moment I was outside, the air seemed to shift again, lighter, the oppressive feeling of being watched lessened but did not vanish entirely. I stumbled down the ridge, my boots skidding over loose dirt and roots, lungs burning, heart pounding so hard I thought it might leap from my chest. Behind me, the forest remained silent, though I could feel it watching, patient, as though it had waited for me to leave so it could breathe again. I didn't stop until the path flattened out near the edge of the woods and the sun disappeared entirely behind the mountains, leaving only the soft twilight of a day ending. Even now, I can feel the memory of that cabin pressing against me. I remember the way the shadows pooled in corners, the faint smell of decay that lingered on my clothes, and the way the air seemed heavier, thicker, when I first stepped inside. I've avoided Hogback Ridge ever since, taking longer routes home to ensure I never set foot near that place again. But the memory lingers like a ghost in my mind, an echo I cannot shake. I remember the chair scraping across the floor, slow and deliberate, even though no one was there. I remember the oppressive weight of the shadows, pressing close as if the cabin itself were alive. Sometimes, late at night, I dream of it. I see the cabin perched on the ridge, gray and crooked, staring at me through the forest. I hear the floorboards groan beneath invisible feet, and I feel the air thicken with the same patient, waiting presence. The memory is vivid, more real than most days, and I can't decide if that's a blessing or a curse. I survived the ridge, yes, but the memory of the cabin follows me, a quiet reminder that some places hold more than just wood and nails. Some places hold the past, or maybe the people who came before, and they do not like to be forgotten. Even telling the story now, recounting each detail, I can feel the chill in my chest, the shadows pressing against the edge of my vision. I never needed proof that the cabin was haunted. The proof is in the memory itself, in the way it lingers and presses like the trees against the road, like the whispers in the wind. I can close my eyes and see it clearly. The hollow, sagging cabin, the sun fading behind the mountains, and the way the silence inside made the world outside feel unreal. That day on Hogback Ridge taught me something I will never forget. Curiosity is dangerous in the mountains, and the forest holds stories older and darker than any living person could tell. The cabin waits, patient, silent, knowing that someday someone will wander too close, and the shadows will reach for them too. And I know, in some quiet corner of my mind, that it is still waiting for me to forget it completely, so it can draw me back again. I was driving home from visiting my family, the kind of late afternoon where the sun clings to the horizon, painting the hills in shades of orange and deepening blue. Raven Creek Bridge came into view just as the last streaks of sunlight were swallowed by the fog rolling up from the valley. The mist seemed to spill across the road, swallowing the edges of the asphalt and making the familiar stretch feel entirely foreign. I slowed, gripping the wheel tighter, my knuckles white against the cold leather. The bridge always had that quiet reputation, though I'd never given it much thought. Tonight, though, it felt alive, as if it was waiting for something, or someone. The fog thickened with every second, curling around the guardrails and slipping under the tires. I could barely see the river below, just a dark blur under the dimming sky. My headlights did little more than cut through the haze directly in front of me, leaving everything else hidden, as if the world beyond the bridge had been swallowed entirely. I told myself to keep calm. It was just fog. That's all. Fog and shadows and a long drive. But the moment I was midway across, I saw him. He appeared suddenly, materializing out of the mist at the side of the road. At first, I thought it was another driver or perhaps a hiker who had wandered too close to the bridge. But the closer I looked, the more wrong it felt. He stood perfectly still, his arms hanging loosely at his sides. He looked like a man, tall and thin, but his face, it wasn't a face at all. It was a shadow, a void where his features should have been, and yet I could feel him looking at me, unblinking, patient. My stomach dropped, a hollow, sinking feeling that made it hard to breathe. I froze, fingers gripping the steering wheel, staring at the figure as if moving might make him vanish, or make him notice me. Seconds stretched into eternity. Then instinct took over, a raw surge of adrenaline. I hit the gas, tires squealing slightly on the slick asphalt, and sped across the bridge. I dared not look to the side again, not until I was clear of the fog. But when I glanced in the rearview mirror, my blood ran cold. He was still there at the edge of the mist, watching, unmoving, unblinking, like he had waited for me all along, and now he knew I had seen him. I kept driving, heart hammering, refusing to slow until the last ridge of fog gave way to open road. The forest along the river seemed quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your ears and fills them with imagined noises. Twigs snapping, distant calls, whispers that vanish as soon as you strain to hear them. Every hair on my arms and neck stood on end. I tried to rationalize it. Exhaustion, shadows, the fog playing tricks on my mind. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just that. There was something in that fog, something patient, and it had made its presence known. Since that night, I have never crossed Raven Creek Bridge after dark. I avoid it entirely when the sun dips behind the hills. Even during the day, I can feel a tension creeping in as I approach the old structure, a whisper at the edge of perception, a shadow lingering just beyond clear sight. Friends and family have laughed at my story, called it imagination, a trick of fog and nerves. But I can still see him, tall, still, featureless, watching from the mist, as real as the bridge beneath my tires. Sometimes, when the wind is right, I swear I can smell the river through the trees as if the fog itself has returned to my bedroom. And I cannot shake the feeling that he is patient, waiting, that if I ever drove down that stretch of road at the wrong hour again, I would see him there, exactly as I did, and I would not be able to drive past him this time. He is patient, and he knows the road. And so do I now, which is why I never take it lightly, never pass that bridge after dark, and always glance at the fog, wondering who, or what, waits there when no one is looking. I had chosen that valley for its isolation, a quiet stretch of land tucked between ridges where the forest thickened and the world felt far away. I set up my small tent near a creek, the water burbling softly as the last rays of sunlight bled over the mountains. It was the kind of place where time seemed to stretch, where the wind whispered through the trees in a way that almost felt sentient. I had come for solitude, to hike, fish, and lose myself in the wilderness for a few days. But as twilight fell, the valley began to change. It started with a faint glow in the distance, a point of light bobbing gently among the trees. At first, I thought it was another camper, perhaps someone returning to their campsite or hiking through the ridges. The lantern light was small and unsteady, swaying as if caught in the fingers of a breeze. I left my fire smoldering and walked toward it, curiosity pricking at my spine. The grass beneath my boots was wet with evening dew, and the mist began to creep along the ground, curling around the trunks like smoke from some unseen fire. As I approached, the lantern flickered violently and then vanished, swallowed by the shadows that stretched across the misty field. My stomach dropped, a hollow weight pressing into my chest. I froze for a moment, trying to convince myself it had gone behind a tree, hidden in a dip in the valley. But then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, echoing across the damp grass. They didn't match my pace. They weren't aligned with mine at all, and yet I could feel them, a presence moving just beyond sight, following. My breath hitched, each inhale thick, oppressive, as though the air itself had turned heavy. The valley seemed to shift, alive in some subtle, imperceptible way. The trees swayed, though the wind was still. Shadows gathered in pockets along the ridges, lingering where they should not, pooling and stretching as if something, or someone, was watching. I moved cautiously, trying to stay on the faint trail I had followed in earlier hours, but the sense of being observed only grew. A low humming filled the air, soft at first, indistinct, then louder, threading through the mist and the trees, impossible to place. I spun in a circle, trying to locate the source, but the sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, moving with me, wrapping around me. Panic prickled under my skin, and I realized I had been walking for some time, yet the lantern light was always just at the edge of my vision, bobbing in and out of the mist like it was taunting me. I tried to call out to break the tension with some sound, but my voice was swallowed by the valley. The humming shifted, pulsing with each heartbeat, and then it became words. Soft, unintelligible at first, then unmistakable whispers, sliding through the trees, brushing against my ears. They were not my name, not exactly, but close enough that my mind twisted and recoiled. Fear propelled me back toward my campsite, my boots sinking into the damp ground, the brush tearing at my arms. The lantern light followed, always there, always flickering, never letting me fully leave it behind. By the time I reached my tent, I was shaking, lungs burning from exertion and panic, sweat and dew mingling on my skin. I fumbled with the tent flap, trying to gather my things to pack and leave, but the valley seemed to pulse around me, the trees bending inward as if to watch, as if to trap me. Night came slowly. I could hear the creak, faint and steady, but the shadows had grown thicker, stretching unnaturally across the clearing. The lantern flickered again, just beyond my firelight, and the humming returned, now sharper, more insistent, threading through the branches and underbrush. Sleep refused me entirely. I lay in the tent, eyes wide, trying to convince myself it was my imagination, that the valley had always been quiet and still, that I had let fatigue and isolation twist reality. But every time I closed my eyes, the glow returned, and the whispers followed. Hours, or maybe minutes, time had lost all meaning, passed with the valley watching. The air felt suffocating, pressing into my chest with each shallow breath. I could hear movement outside, subtle, deliberate, not my own. Branches snapped softly in the distance, but not in a way a deer or animal would move. These were measured, purposeful, almost communicative. The shadows under the trees shifted and thickened, and my flashlight cut little more than a narrow circle, leaving the rest to the darkness that seemed to hum along with the valley itself. I stayed awake the entire night, gripping my flashlight, the lantern glow always just out of reach, watching and waiting. I thought I heard voices again, soft murmurs threading through the trees, and I could swear I glimpsed figures moving at the edge of the firelight, taller than deer, but never fully formed, never tangible. I wanted to leave, to pack and drive until the forest was far behind me, but something had rooted me, an instinctive dread that made even turning my back a risk. By morning, the mist had lifted slightly, but the valley remained heavy with silence, the kind of silence that presses on the skull and slows the heartbeat. The lantern glow was gone, but I knew it had not disappeared entirely. It was a memory now, etched into the air, in the shadows, in the quiet that would follow me far beyond this place. I packed quickly, my hands trembling, and left without looking back, forcing my truck down the winding road that led out of the valley. Every turn I took, I felt it at the edge of my vision, faint and flickering, waiting for me to glance too long. I never camped in that valley again, and I never will. But the memory clings. I can still feel the hum in my chest, the oppressive weight of the air, the way the shadows stretch unnaturally when I close my eyes. Sometimes, late at night, I swear I see a flicker of light outside my window, a lantern just beyond the yard, and I feel that same patient watching, the valley alive once more. It is a memory that refuses to fade, a presence that will follow me as long as I carry the story, a whispering reminder that some places in the mountains are never truly empty. I was driving late that night, rain hammering against the windshield, the road slick and reflective under the dim glow of my headlights. Devil's Curve had always had a reputation, at least among the locals I'd grown up hearing stories from. Twisting, dangerous, and the sort of place where accidents were more than common, they were expected. I had driven it countless times, and yet that night felt different. The storm made the mountains feel closer, the trees leaning inward over the road, their wet branches swaying with the wind and rain, scratching against the roof of the truck like long, thin fingers. Visibility was poor, the yellow lines on the road barely cutting through the sheets of water, and the rhythmic roar of the storm made me feel simultaneously insulated and exposed. Halfway through the first hairpin curve, I saw her, standing at the edge of the road, thumb out, drenched, her thin clothes plastered to her body. She didn't move when I slowed down. She simply stared, almost frozen, like a statue caught in the downpour. Her hair was dark, plastered across her pale face, and the rain traced down her cheeks in rivulets that reflected the headlights. There was something immediately wrong about her posture, the way she didn't shift her weight naturally, didn't even seem to notice the storm around her. Still, instinctively, I stopped, the tires hissing slightly on the wet asphalt. She climbed in silently, shaking off water that soaked the passenger seat. Her eyes were empty, distant, almost hollow, fixed straight ahead as if staring through the windshield, and her presence made the interior of the truck feel suddenly colder. I tried to speak, to ask where she was headed, but her voice was barely audible, a whisper that slipped past my ears like mist. I repeated myself louder, a little panicked now, but she didn't acknowledge me. I glanced over at her occasionally, and each time her expression remained the same, vacant, unyielding, as if she were not really there at all. The descent down the mountain began, Devil's Curve winding beneath us, each turn sharp and unforgiving. My hands gripped the wheel tighter, and I noticed that the radio static I had left on for comfort seemed to intensify, a low, hissing sound that matched the rhythm of the rain. Every so often, I would catch glimpses of her from the corner of my eye, and yet when I looked directly, she seemed motionless, as if frozen in time. The road narrowed, the wet asphalt reflecting the streaks of my headlights and the trees bending over the road. Something about her presence made the familiar curves feel unfamiliar, like the mountain had shifted around us, pressing inward, reshaping itself in silence. And then she was gone. Not a twitch, not a blink, simply gone from the seat beside me. My heart leapt, the sudden emptiness deafening, and I slammed on the brakes, sliding slightly on the wet road. I turned the truck toward the roadside, searching frantically, calling her name into the storm. There was nothing. No puddle, no sign of her on the asphalt, not a footprint in the soft mud at the edge of the shoulder. Only the relentless rain, the groaning of the tires against the slick curves, and the trees bending with the wind as if nothing had happened. My breathing came in harsh, uneven gasps, and the memory of her eyes, the hollow, distant stare, pressed heavily on me. I drove on, slowly, gripping the wheel as the rain continued to pour, the curves of Devil's Curve unrelenting, twisting into darkness. The interior of the truck felt too quiet, every drop of rain against the roof loud, echoing, a constant reminder of how alone I was. I tried to rationalize it, tried to tell myself she was a hitchhiker who had slipped into the shadows, some trick of the storm and the night, but deep down I knew it wasn't possible. The memory of her presence, the cold that clung to my skin, and the way the air seemed to shift when she had been there, it was as real as the wet asphalt under my tires. The rest of the drive to the bottom of the mountain was tense, my eyes flicking constantly to the passenger seat, half expecting her to reappear, half dreading it. Every curve, every bend, felt sharper, more deliberate, as if the road itself remembered what had happened. By the time I reached the town at the base of the ridge, the storm had lessened to a drizzle, and the streets were slick but ordinary. I parked in my driveway, hands still trembling, and stepped out into the cool night air, glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see her standing there, thumb out, waiting for the next ride. Days later, I told a neighbor about the incident, and he told me a story I had vaguely heard growing up. Decades ago, a girl had died on Devil's Curve in the rain, waiting for a ride home she would never get. Since then, they said, she sometimes appears, hitching along that stretch of road, disappearing suddenly when the car reaches a particular point. It was one of those local legends, the kind that made sense in the dark but seemed impossible in the light. And yet, when I replay that night in my mind, it isn't legend. It's memory, as vivid as the rain pounding the roof of the truck, as real as the hollowness in her eyes. I haven't driven Devil's Curve at night since that storm. Even when I am forced to take it during the day, I can't help but glance at the roadside, expecting to see a small, drenched figure standing silently, thumb out, waiting. Every rainstorm brings a memory flooding back, and sometimes I swear I can feel the cold touch of her presence, brushing against the passenger seat, even when I am miles away. There's a quiet weight to the story, a lingering fear that no explanation can fully lift. Some nights I lie awake listening to the rain, wondering if she is still out there, waiting for the next car, the next unsuspecting driver to stop, and if the curve will claim them the way it almost claimed me. The truth is, I don't know what she was, or if she was anyone at all, but I remember everything. The cold, the rain, the slick black road, and the eyes that looked through me as if I were not real. And the lesson is simple, though it took me far too long to accept. Some roads in the mountains hold more than asphalt and curves. They hold echoes of the past, memories that are not yours, and warnings that are never spoken aloud. Devil's Curve will always be waiting, patient, twisting in the dark, and I know now that even decades later, the girl still rides with the storm, vanishing before your eyes, but leaving a weight that no one forgets. I had been exploring the backroads for years, chasing old ruins and abandoned structures tucked away in the folds of the Appalachian hills. That day, the clouds hung low, thick and gray, a steady drizzle dampening the narrow dirt road that led up between two hills. I had parked the truck near a bend where the mud was soft, and the valley below had already begun to blur under the rain. I knew the chapel existed only from a few whispered mentions among locals. Stories about a small building left to rot decades ago, about strange lights or singing that came from its walls. Curiosity drove me up the hillside, the mud sucking at my boots as I climbed toward the structure, the trees leaning inward, making the path feel narrower, more confined with every step. The chapel came into view as the mist began to thicken, a small gray outline against the heavier green of the forest. Its steeple had long since collapsed, the windows gaping like empty eyes, and the wooden door hung crooked, swollen from years of rain and neglect. I hesitated at the threshold, a chill pressing against my spine, but the urge to see inside was stronger than fear. The moment I stepped through the doorway, the air shifted, heavy and cold, like the building itself exhaled as I entered. Dust motes floated in streaks of dim light cutting through broken windows. The smell of rot and mildew was thick, clinging to my clothes and hair, mingling with something else. Faint, metallic, like old blood or iron. I moved slowly, stepping over rotted floorboards that groaned underfoot. The pews were splintered, scattered across the cracked stone floor. The altar, once pristine, had been cracked and weathered, the remnants of candle wax still clinging to its edges. And then I heard it, a soft murmur almost too faint to recognize. I froze, straining to listen. The sound grew, layering into more distinct notes, like a choir rehearsing somewhere far away, voices from another time drifting through the air. They weren't harsh, weren't discordant. They were eerily beautiful, mournful, weaving a melody that made my chest tighten. I called out, my voice trembling, but it felt alien in the vast, hollow space. The sound of my own words bounced back at me, warped and strange, swallowed quickly by the chapel's empty walls. The singing swelled for a moment, rising, echoing, and then it stopped abruptly. Silence pressed in, heavy and suffocating, broken only by faint whispers, too soft to understand at first. Then I realized they were repeating my name. Each syllable drawn out, curling around me, moving across the walls, seeping into the floor beneath my boots. My stomach dropped, and adrenaline slammed through my veins. Panic surged, and I ran. The chapel seemed to stretch endlessly as I fled, the air thickening, the floorboards groaning under my frantic pace. Every corner I turned, the whispers followed, layering over themselves, pressing close, as if the building itself had learned my rhythm, my movements. The door at the front felt impossibly far away, and when I finally reached it, it resisted my shove, swelling in its frame. My palms ached against the warped wood, and I had to force it open with a strength I didn't know I had. The moment I crossed the threshold, sunlight struck my face, warm and blinding, and the whispers ceased. The singing was gone. I stumbled backward, gasping, knees weak, and collapsed onto the muddy slope just outside the chapel. I looked back at the ruined building, its jagged silhouette leaning against the hillside, silent, patient, as though it had been waiting for me all along. The mist rolled down the hills, curling around the chapel, hiding it from view, and for a long moment I couldn't decide whether I had escaped or been released. I drove back down the road slowly, mud splashing under the tires, eyes fixed on the fading hills. Even as the distance grew, I could feel the weight of the chapel, the memory of those voices pressing at the back of my mind. That night I couldn't sleep. The faint melody of that hymn drifted through my dreams, and I would wake, convinced I could hear it through the walls of my own home. For days afterward, every church bell, every whispered tone on the wind made my pulse quicken. The memory of my name, drawn out in soft syllables that weren't my own, lingered, a reminder of the chapel's patient, quiet presence. Months later, I drove past that hill again. The chapel was barely visible, swallowed by overgrowth, its silhouette fractured and gray. But even as I passed, a faint note seemed to ride the wind, fragile yet insistent, echoing faintly against the hills. My hands gripped the wheel tighter, and I forced my gaze ahead, reminding myself that some things in the mountains were meant to be left alone. Some buildings, some memories, some voices. The chapel remained behind the trees, patient, waiting, and I knew I would carry the echo of its hymn with me for the rest of my days. I had chosen Bearclaw Trail for its solitude, a winding path that carved its way through the steep ridges of the Appalachian wilderness. It was early morning when I set out, mist still clinging to the valleys, the sun struggling to pierce the thick canopy of pines and oaks. The forest usually hummed with life, birds calling to one another, insects droning in the underbrush. But that day, the woods were unervingly quiet. Every snap of a twig beneath my boots sounded amplified, echoing through the dense trees like a warning. At first, I told myself it was just the weather, the early hour, a trick of the light and the fog. But as I ascended, the feeling of being watched began to curl around my spine, subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. The shadows seemed wrong. Not the usual long, soft shapes cast by the morning sun, but rigid, deliberate, stretching in ways the light should not allow. As I stepped over roots and rocks, I noticed the shadows between the trees shifting in unnatural patterns, moving contrary to the sun. A branch swayed, casting a shadow that should have fallen eastward, yet it stretched west, as if the forest itself had been warped, bending reality in small, almost imperceptible ways. My heart thudded, my pace quickened, and I told myself again it was just imagination, that the quiet, the fog, the uneven ground was playing tricks on me. But then I began to hear it, a faint echo of my steps, not from behind, but alongside me, off in the undergrowth. Every footfall I made seemed mirrored by something unseen, a presence keeping pace, patient and silent. I paused on a narrow ridge, the valley spread out below me in rolling green folds. That's when I saw them, tall shapes, far too tall to be men, draped in the shadow of the trees, impossibly still. I squinted, thinking the light was fooling me, that they were just twisted tree trunks or stumps warped by years of wind and rain. But as I moved, they shifted slightly, keeping pace without stepping fully into the open. Their presence was undeniable. They did not blink, did not breathe audibly, but I felt the weight of their attention, the patience in their stillness. I forced myself to continue along the trail, careful not to run, knowing that panicking might draw their attention more directly. The forest seemed to close in around me as I hiked, the shadows weaving between the trunks like living things, trailing along the path and vanishing whenever I looked directly. The silence was suffocating. No birds, no insects, not even the wind seemed to reach the ridge. I told myself it was natural, that I was overthinking it, but instinct told me otherwise. The shapes did not belong to the forest, and yet they were of it, camouflaged perfectly, patient as predators. My skin prickled, every hair on my arm standing straight, and I moved faster, though still carefully, listening for the faint echo of movement that always seemed a fraction behind my own. Hours passed, though it felt like minutes, the trail climbing steadily, twisting through thick undergrowth and dense stands of spruce. The shapes followed silently, never stepping fully into view, yet never leaving. Occasionally, I would glance sideways, catching glimpses of movement that vanished if I looked directly, like smoke curling between the trees. My mind began to reel with questions I could not answer. What were they, and why had they been watching me so patiently? I thought of local legends, of feral people living hidden in the mountains, of spirits that haunted trails and ridges, of old warnings whispered among hikers. None seemed to fit exactly, yet all whispered of the same thing, that some parts of the forest were not meant to be walked alone. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I broke through the tree line onto a sunlit plateau. Birds called again, the wind whispered through the grass, insects hummed lazily in the heat, and the normal rhythm of the forest returned. I stopped, heart pounding, head swiveling to scan the edges of the tree lane. Nothing moved. Nothing followed. And yet, even in the light and the noise, I could feel them lingering just beyond the edge of perception, patient and unseen, waiting for the sun to fade again. The memory of the rigid, impossibly tall shapes, the shadows that defied the sun, pressed against my mind, a quiet dread that refused to leave. I didn't linger on the plateau. I moved quickly, boots pounding the trail back toward the ridge I had parked near, trying to shake the sensation that something had walked beside me all the way, unseen yet constant. Even as the trail widened, even when the valley opened fully to the morning light, the memory clung to me. Every shadow on the path seemed elongated, distorted, a reminder of the shapes that had watched me, the patient presence in the quiet, still forest. Years later, I still hike Bearclaw Trail occasionally, though never alone, and never in the early morning. The forest now feels normal in the daylight, the birds and insects filling the air as they should. But I always notice the shadows. I always feel the echo of steps that are not mine. And when the sun dips low and the forest darkens, I cannot shake the feeling that they return, tall and silent, waiting patiently for nightfall, for the next lone hiker to wander into the rhythm of their patient watching. I had been driving along the parkway late that night, the road slick from an earlier rain, the mountains shrouded in a low misty fog that seemed to flatten everything in its path. I was tired, the kind of bone-deep weariness that creeps in after hours behind the wheel, and I needed a break. My eyes scanned the road ahead, and then I saw it, the glow of lights marking a rest stop tucked into a bend of the highway. Relief washed over me, and I eased off the asphalt, tires hissing on wet gravel as I pulled into the lot. The place was empty, completely deserted. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered weakly, casting irregular shadows across the cracked pavement. The small building for the bathrooms had its doors locked, a sign dangling loosely on the frame. I stepped out of the truck, hoping to find someone, anyone, but the air was still, too still. Even the wind seemed to have abandoned the valley. There was a faint scent of damp wood and gasoline lingering in the lot, mixed with something else I couldn't immediately place, something metallic, sharp, and oddly sweet. I shook my head and muttered to myself, trying to chase away the unease that had begun to creep along my spine. As I wandered the lot, I noticed the sign above the small rest building. I stopped, squinting in the flickering light. The name of the rest stop was unfamiliar, something I had never seen before. I knew the parkway well, every turn and landmark, and yet this sign was entirely new to me. I crouched slightly to inspect the edges, half expecting it to be weathered and old, but it looked freshly painted, almost too crisp against the decaying lot. My unease grew, and I turned to look back toward the road, only to catch the brief reflection of headlights glinting in the mist behind me. I spun around, heart hammering, but the road was empty. No vehicles, no motion, nothing. My breath quickened, and I realized the parking lot had a strange quality to it, as if the fog and the shadows were stretching, swallowing the edges of the lot and blurring the line between asphalt and the forest. I started toward my truck, my steps uneven, scanning the darkness around me. The headlights flickered again briefly, just at the edge of perception, and then vanished. I told myself it was a reflection, a trick of the wet pavement, and yet the feeling of being watched pressed against me, heavy and insistent. I jumped into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and started the engine. The hum of the truck seemed impossibly loud in the empty lot, the vibrations crawling through the seat and steering wheel. As I glanced around, trying to find any landmark, anything familiar, the impossible happened. The rest stop was gone. The lot, the building, the sign, everything had vanished. In their place were thick trees, overgrown brush, and a narrow path that led nowhere I recognized. My pulse leapt, adrenaline spiking, and I swung the truck around, tires crunching over the gravel that now seemed to have appeared out of nowhere. I tried to make sense of it. I checked my phone, no signal. Google Maps, which had guided me this far, showed only the parkway winding through the hills, no rest stop listed. I scanned the treeline, my eyes straining to pierce the fog, but there was nothing. Just the forest, indifferent, silent, and somehow ancient. The memory of the lights and the sign pressed against me, vivid in every detail. The flickering overhead bulbs, the locked doors, the smell that had been so sharp and real, and yet they had vanished entirely, as if the world had swallowed them whole. I drove for miles, scanning every bend and curve, hoping to find the rest stop re-emerge, some rational explanation for what had happened. But nothing appeared. Every turn brought only familiar road, trees, and mist. Sleep eluded me that night, and when I closed my eyes, the memory of that lot lingered, sharp and impossible. The flickering lights, the empty building, the eerie weight of the silence pressing down on me. I've never returned to that stretch of the parkway. Friends have joked about me losing track of a side road, about exhaustion and the rain playing tricks on my mind. But I know what I saw. I remember every detail vividly. The yellowed sign, the damp smell, the loneliness of the lot, the brief headlights in the mist. And I can't shake the feeling that the rest stop is still out there, somewhere waiting along the parkway, hidden in a fold of the mountains where the road bends too sharply and the mist curls like smoke. Some night, I know, a traveler will pull off the asphalt, weary and alone, and see the flicker of lights and the locked doors, never realizing that the world is quietly shifted, and that what they found is not a place on any map, but a memory, a trick of the mountains, patient and waiting, just beyond the edge of reason.